Hello everyone, welcome to yet another session of the daily news analysis by SRIRAM'S IAS, where we take up the important articles that feature in the Hindu newspaper and break them down for our understanding from the examination point of view. So let's start today's discussion by taking the important articles. The important articles which we've taken up for discussion are on our screens, and let's take up the first article for the day. The first article which appears on the news now reads Making Sense of the Freebies Issue. Now this is an important editorial which is appearing in the newspaper talking about a very relevant and important topic, that is of the freebies issue. Now what is this issue going on? Most of us who would be aware, there is a debate going on with respect to the freebies that are given by the various governments, the central governments and the state governments to the residents of the country. What do we mean by freebies? Something like this, where the political parties at the time of elections dole out free supplies of certain important amenities such as electricity, water and farm loan waiver, cycles, laptops, TV sets and various other things in order to lure the voters. These kind of facilities are known as freebies. So in this context, even the Prime Minister came in the debate and said that this freebie culture is actually a very dangerous culture which poses various harms to the financial structure of the state government as well as the central government. And then the matter also went to the Supreme Court, wherein the Supreme Court has asked the centre to consult the Finance Commission to judge on this issue whether the freebies culture is a good one to have or not. And similarly, when the matter went to the Election Commission, which was asked to curb these practices, because most of these freebie practices are given at the time of elections. So the Election Commission ended up saying that the decision whether to give out freebies or not is with the state government only, and that is why the Election Commission does not have much rights on this. So this has all been the developments on this issue, on which various constitutional bodies have been roped in, and Supreme Court has also given its suggestion. So in this backdrop, this topic becomes very important for us to know from the examination point of view, and the pros and cons of this freebies and the rational analysis of this topic becomes very important for us. That's what we'll attempt to do via this article. And so this article primarily talks about the arguments in favor of freebies as to why freebies are good, but we will have a wholesome discussion and a rational analysis of this topic. So first of all, as we understood freebies, what are they? The political parties which promise to offer free electricity, water supply and monthly allowances. So all these basic amenities which the political parties and various state governments and central governments promise and deliver to the residents fall in the category of freebies. But first, starting with, when we give such free services to the public, is there any negative impact that occurs? So let's first look at the issues which can happen when we give free services to the public. So first impact of such freebies, what can be on the expenditure side when the state government or the central government, and is this something which only one political party does? All the political parties across the spectrum indulge into the practices of giving freebies, whether be that the ruling party right now or the other opposition parties. So what impact will this cause on the expenditure side when the services are given to the residents of the state and country and they are not being charged for it? Will it not put huge drain on the state's resources, because the money is being spent but it is not recovered back? So therefore, services or freebies such as farm loan waiver in Maharashtra resulted in an outgo of 45,000 to 51,000 crore during the financial year 2021. So with this example, we can see that there are significant drain on the resources. So expenditure side means that there is increased expenditure going on, and on the revenue side, which means that on the earning of the states, what results into? So on the earning, there is a negative impact on state-owned enterprises, because they are not able to earn as well, because these services which are given to the public, they are not charged for it. So the earning of the state-owned enterprises would take a hit. So there is a negative impact on state-owned enterprises, leading loss-making PSUs. The March report from ICRA subsidy payments by governments were estimated to comprise 16% of the DISCOM revenues at an all India level of 2021-2022. What does this mean? DISCOMs are the distribution companies which distribute electricity to our houses, and when some political party promises free electricity to the residents, what this would mean is that the distributing company would have to give the electricity at free cost and not charge for it. So what will that result into? Will it not result into the loss-making PSUs? So the brunt of giving free electricity has to be borne by the DISCOMs, wherein the report has shown that there has been decrease in their revenue. So the revenue of the PSUs or those companies which are indulging in these facilities take a hit. Then the political ramifications are also there. Political ramifications are when most parties promise such freebies and it becomes competitive, then all parties indulge in this, and when all parties indulge into promising freebies, can it not result into illogical planning? Anyone can say anything. So that is why competitive manifestos sometimes seem impractical and illogical and also unimplementable, because while promising, one can promise anything, but it becomes very difficult to implement that. So it has political ramifications as well. So what then other issues are that there is a huge debt burden. Obviously, when the expenditure is high, the revenue is low. The debt to GDP ratio of Punjab reached 53.3% in 2021 due to high subsidy burden. And recently in this state now, a political party is promising free electricity. So therefore, some certain questions arise when you promise freebies, and it also differs from state to state. So when we are looking that these kind of services can be provided when there is the expenditure is in an adequate amount, the revenue is enough. So all of these parameters need to be checked for state to state basis when such services are provided. Then it also creates a never-ending cycle of freebies, because once it is promised, like we had discussed with a farm loan waiver, if it is promised once, it creates a culture of the farmer thinking that he or she can take a loan and wait for the election for the loan to get waived off. So it has the vulnerability to create a never-ending cycle of freebies. Then it also creates social inequalities, with the Rajasthan government's decision to revert to the old pension scheme for its employees. Just 6% of the population captures benefits as high as 56% of the pension and salary expenditure. If these freebies are not implemented properly and the benefits are given only to a certain section of people, that might result into social inequalities. So this is one of the issue as well, and more expenditure towards servicing just interest cost, which means that more, like we saw on the expenditure part, that the expenditure goes up and more of it is done towards servicing just the interest costs, and though that expenditure which should have been done for capital building or asset building, that does not happen. So these are the issues with related to the freebies that are said, and that is why it is said that if this culture is not rationalized, it can lead to a fiscal disaster. This has been said by none other than the 15th Finance Commission Chairman, Mr. N.K. Singh. So this is the backdrop with respect to what are the issues. So we can understand that there are various disadvantages which can happen if you give free services to the public, which can result into burden on the state's exchequer as well as the central exchequer. But is there any positive side to these freebies as well? So let's look at the arguments in favor that are there in for the freebies. So first of all, here is where today's article comes in, that it tries to first ask a question as to what exactly are freebies. When you say that at the time of election certain free services are given and that results into a negative balance for the state exchequer and the central exchequer, that can be fine. But the author makes a distinction saying that those services which are very necessary for the welfare of the people. What can be the services meant for the welfare of the people? So when the COVID pandemic struck, the central government itself launched the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana. Under this, it gave free food grains to the migrant laborers, those people who had ration cards. So was this a freebie given? Was this a service given at a lesser cost so that the food security needs of these migrants are met? So this is a welfare measure. It can also be called a freebie. So in this article, author tries to first segregate that freebies can be those services which harm the state's exchequer, but there are also certain welfare measures which are so fundamental for running the country that they cannot be accounted as freebies. And the examples are the food security measures that are done via the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, what we see via the PDS and ration card systems, right? The employment guarantee schemes such as the Manrega, which guarantees employment to rural and now the urban workers as well. So these schemes which are there to increase the human productivity of the people of the country, these, the author point out, should not be considered in this argument of freebies being bad, because these are so fundamental to the development of the country that this more than anything should be indulged by the governments, and more than that the system should be rationalized, which means that the procurement of food grains in the PDS should be enhanced. The Manrega system should be rationalized to take in more workers and make sure for the social security needs. So these particular initiatives are very important. So therefore there are certain arguments in favor. And what are they? First is that it is social investment. Like we said, the welfare measures that we do and provide to the needy people of the country, it is social investment, because we are investing into the human capital of the country. So aid to the poor is seen as a wasteful expenditure, but it's not. But low interest rates to corporates to get cheap loans for the sop of cutting corporate taxes are never criticized. So this also is a major argument that is made against freebies, that there is a lot of criticism when free services are given to the needy people in terms of their basic needs. But what about the corporate tax rate cuts that is being given to the corporate companies as incentives? So what is provided to the corporates can be clubbed as incentives, where the corporate tax that is levied upon these companies has been lessened in the past years. So that is being clubbed as incentive, but giving to the needy people or the basic services is clubbed as freebies and is criticized upon. So this is a major argument that comes up against this debate of freebies. Then second is that, like we saw, it's the socialistic policy to provide for welfare of the country. And then in the election manifesto part, proponents of such policies would argue that poll promises are essential for voters to know what the party would do if it comes to power and have the chance to weigh options. So it also provides a argument in favor that providing such services in its election manifesto is also a needful thing to do, so that the voters have the option of choosing what they want and they know what kind of service they are getting. And as we saw, it is a motion, it's a notion of welfare that these services are indulged into. So economics opine that as long as any state has the capacity and ability to finance freebies, then it's fine. And if not, then freebies are the burden on the economy. This is also something we saw, that it depends on state to state, and it depends on the expenditure capacity and revenue capacity of the state. And other wasteful expenditure, which we saw, that granting incentives to corporates in the name of corporate tax cuts, but curbing the same in terms of granting free basic services to the needy, is a very disbalanced proposition in this manner, and therefore there are certain arguments in favor of the freebie granting as well. And in this context, the article points out that granting services such as food security under the National Food Security Act, giving employment to the rural laborers under the Manrega Act are essential services, and this debate should be rationalized. So how to rationalize this, this debate, and what to make of this freebie culture? So what are the measures that we do to mitigate the negative impacts that are arising out of this freebie culture and the disadvantages that are there? So first is the role of Finance Commission, which this is the body which is established under the Constitution, which takes care of the devolution of taxes and the money that should be shared between the states and center. So this body can take a rational outlook as to how much is the capacity of the state to spend and how much it should be spending. So, right, when it makes allocation to various states, it can take into account the debt of the state, and in the context of that, find out whether the state's economy will be sustainable over the years in the context of the freebies. So this assessment made by the Finance Commission will help the state to take the decision on whether to grant freebies or not. Then second is strengthening the election commission, which we saw earlier that the case went to election commission and it held that it did not have any power to rule on the states whether or not it wanted to grant freebies or not. So the election commission can be given increased powers and bring freebies under the model conduct code, which is promulgated at the time of the elections and regulating manifestos by ECI. Then there should be demand-based freebies, as we saw that there is a distinction between important freebies and unimportant ones. So those whose demand is really high and they're significant in the economy should be given impetus. So with priority to DPSPs based on merit goods such as the PDS system, which is therefore as important and fundamental as food security, education, health, and for greater prosperity. So these freebies which are required in these sectors for which demand is high and the productivity of the human capital in the country is going to increase, those can be indulged into. Then is improving the transparency. If at all such freebies are promised as well, it should be transparent to check what happened with these freebies and what is the status that is going on to ensure it reaches real beneficiaries, right? So we saw with farm loan waivers when we were discussing that much of the benefits did not even get transferred to the intended beneficiaries who were to benefit from this scheme, and only a certain section got benefited. So this issue can be solved by maintaining transparency with this initiative. Then revising the FRBM Act. FRBM Act is the Financial Responsibility and Budget Management Act, which was enacted by the Parliament to keep a check on the executive's role into curbing the inflation and sort of deficit of the economy. So this act can place a limit on expenditure on loan waivers, free electricity and water. This can be taken as a decision by the Parliament. So this can be an oversight of the legislature on the executive. And then outcome-based budgeting should be done, which means that if one political party or state government has promised a freebie, the outcome of it should decide whether in the next term such freebie should be granted or not. This is known as outcome-based budgeting, wherein in order to grant budgetary allocation to one scheme, the outcome of it in the previous year is checked. So makes the departments accountable for their work, as done on Jharkhand recently fixes responsibility on debts. So these are some of the methods that should be applied to rationalize this debate on freebies, wherein those services which are extremely welfare for the people of the country, for people below the poverty line, those freebies should not be hampered with. If anything, they should be enhanced, their system should be enhanced, and those freebies which can put a burden on the expenditure and revenue side on the state government and central government, they should be rationalized by the given measures. So this was the discussion with respect to the freebies. This is an extremely important topic that is going on because the high dignitaries of the country are talking about it, and therefore it is very probable that we can find a question in the UPSC paper with respect to this topic. So with this, let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article which appears in the newspaper now reads, trade deficit soared past $31 billion in July. Now, this particular article becomes important for us from the point of view of GS3. The previous article was also important from the point of view of GS3. So, trade deficit forms the fundamental concept which we need to be very thorough about when we study Indian economy. So, through this article, whenever the month ends, in the start of every month, we take a account of our trade deficit as to how much it is right now, how much it has changed from the past month, past year. So we'll do the same, and what have been those commodities which have increased in imports, which have decreased in the exports. We'll also take a look at that. So first of all, we'll understand what exactly is trade deficit. We have seen this earlier, but we'll take a look at it once again. So what do we mean by trade deficit? Deficit is something which means that it is there is a difference of something and there is a negative difference, that is known as deficit, right? And then what do we mean by trade? So trade is known as the trade buying of goods by the country and selling of goods by the country. Remember, when I say only goods and not services, so therefore this trade is only done in goods, what we also called merchandise trade. So when the trade is done and the country imports certain goods and at the same time exports certain goods, the difference between the import and export is known as the trade deficit. And if the difference is high, which means that we are importing more than we are exporting, that is where we will result into trade deficit. So this is what we see, and this trade forms a part of, we've seen earlier, of the balance of payment accounts, which means that this is that account which the country maintains with respect to the international transaction for either buying from the international market or spending money in the international market. So in this balance of payment account, we have two types of account. One is the current account and one is the capital account. Now what is the difference between current account and capital account? As we can see from the name, the current account means that these involve transaction for the current year, which means that for the preceding year, whatever the transaction the country is making, either it is importing goods, buying goods, selling goods, exporting. So all of these transactions which take place in a year are put into the current account, and transactions beyond 1 year and major capital transactions are done under the capital account, right? So these two account bifurcations is done under the balance of payments. This first fact that we understand. And then in the current account, we have two types of trade that is done, that is trade in visible and trade in invisible. So what do we mean when we say trade in visible and trade in invisible? Visible means those things which are tangible. So therefore goods and the trade in goods form under the part of visible trade category. And in the invisible trade, services and the remittances which we have talked about, services such as the IT services which we export to various countries, that is an invisible part. So services and transfers become a part of the invisible current account. So trade deficit falls under the visible category, wherein the difference between the import of goods and export of goods is calculated, and that difference is known as the trade deficit. Then what would be the current account deficit? So current account deficit would be calculated when we club the visible and invisible. So which means that when we total the imports of goods and services and we take its difference with the export of goods and services, the difference that comes between this import and export is known as the current account deficit. So I hope the difference is clear. Trade deficit is only for visible, wherein the trade in goods is considered, and current account deficit is for both goods and services, wherein the difference of import and export for both goods and services is considered. So this is the trade deficit for us which is in consideration. So what is it saying? It is saying that the trade deficit for the month of July 2022, that was last month, was $31.02 billion, and it has soared, which means that this is a record number that is happening for the trade deficit, which is a and why are we studying such fundamental factors? Because when we look at the figure of trade deficit, we get to have a picture of the Indian economy as to how it is performing. So if the trade deficit goes extremely high, it can show a picture of our Indian economy wherein we can see that the exports are not being more competitive and we are importing more than we are exporting. So that is why this figure becomes very important, and it has shown a record increase to $31.02 billion for the month of July 2022. And then how does it compare with the month of July 2021? So a year earlier, the trade deficit was 10.63 billion. So can we see the difference? A year earlier in July, the trade deficit was 10.63 billion, and exactly a year afterwards, it is increased up to 3x and reached up to 3.02 billion. And in the last month, that is June 2022, it was $26.2 billion. So it has shown around $5 billion increase in 1 month itself. So this is the trend that is going on, which shows us that the trade deficit is increasing. And why is it increasing? Because there has been decrease in our exports and increase in our imports. So which are those commodities? That becomes important for us from the point of view of the examination, as to which are those commodities which are decreasing in exports and which are increasing in imports. So those commodities which are increasing in imports are our silver imports. So we're importing silver a lot. Then petroleum imports, we know that we import crude oil and the crude petroleum. So therefore, petroleum imports have increased, and the coal imports, we also know this, that much of the coal in the country is imported, and therefore the coal imports have also increased, and electronic goods have also been increased in the imports. And simultaneously, there have been decreased exports as well. So which are these commodities which have shown a decrease in its trend? So petroleum products, right? When we import crude oil, we refine the petroleum and make finished petroleum product. So those finished petroleum product has seen a decrease in its export. And then cotton, yarn and handloom products. So we are a significant exporter of cotton, and again these cotton, yarn and handloom products have seen a decrease in their export. Then iron ore exports have also seen a decrease, and engineering goods which we supply as exports have also seen a decrease in their pattern. So what becomes important for us to know is the trends of the trade deficit, what figure is it showing, and what are the major goods that we know are showing a trend in increase in imports and decrease in exports. So with this, we finish this and we move on to our next article. Now the next article which appears in the newspaper reads, India is the highest priority, says the Maldives President. Now the Maldives President is on a visit to India, and in this context the India-Maldives relation become very important from the examination point of view, and the position of Maldives as well, which is situated in the Indian Ocean, right, below Sri Lanka. It is there in the Indian Ocean. Malé is the capital of Maldives. It's a set of islands, so it's an archipelago. What do we mean by archipelago? Archipelago is a set of islands, a large set of islands of around 1,192 small islands. So Maldives is made up of 1,192 small islands that are strewn across the equator, and it is known for its sandy beaches, right? Most of the people of the country want to go to holiday to Maldives, and that is why we know how famous a destination for tourist activities Maldives has become. So in this context as well, the country becomes important and the relations become important. So we'll take a look at what are the various converging points for India and Maldives relations, and what is the article saying. So the president has come, Maldives President has come to India, and it has signed a cyber security pact with India to take care of the cyber security of the country. So, and at the same time, certain infrastructure projects have been signed. So we'll take a look at that and the broader aspects of the relationship between two countries. So first of all, what is the importance of Maldives for India? So first is the economic importance, which means that despite its small size, the Maldives is currently being wooed by a number of developed and developing countries. As we can see, the tourist footfall in Maldives is increasing, and at the same time, because of the strategic importance of the geographic location of the Maldives with respect to key international shipping lanes. So as we saw in the location, it can also become a transshipment hub in the Indian Ocean, and that is why for Maldives to develop itself into this hub, it is of quite economic importance. So this is the economic importance, and after that, the importance of Maldives with respect to strategic location is also very important, because as we know, the theatre of Indian Ocean is heating up since the past many years, wherein international players such as the UK, Australia, US have also stepped in, and China is making strides to establish its hegemony. So in this backdrop, India is also taking steps to strengthen its stronghold in Indian Ocean, and in that aspect, cooperating with Maldives and maintaining good relations with Maldives is a very important point for India that way. So therefore, with respect to security as well, Maldives becomes a very important factor. Then the anti-terror operations. Both these countries have significantly made agreements on anti-terror operations. So it is standing with India in anti-terror operations, because even the Maldives as a country has a Muslim majority in its population, and this country is facing a lot of radical Islamist attacks and measures by the ISIS to woo the youngsters of the country. So both countries are fighting together on the basis of anti-terror front. And then in terms of global support also, both countries have come together, wherein Maldives supports India's permanent membership and India's candidature for non-permanent seat to the year 2020-21. So both these countries have shown international support as well. And this is also important, as we saw, for curbing China's ambition, because even China is getting close to Maldives on an economic and strategic level, and that is why India needs to also step up its relationship with Maldives. And then in 2016, an action plan between India and Maldives was signed for the defense cooperation to enhance shared strategic and security interests of the two countries in the Indian Ocean region. So with this security pact, the President has come to the country and has further signed the Cyber Security Pact. So this is with respect to the importance of it. Then what steps has India taken with respect to Maldives? So for India has signed an economic recovery package. During the times of pandemic also India helped Maldives. So India had offered Maldives an economic recovery package of 1.4 billion due to the during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the island nation in December 2018. And with this, during the times of pandemic as well, significant aid was given to the Maldives nation. And then a line of credit, which means that loans given to a country, that has also been promulgated. India has announced line of credit and currency swap deals to Maldives. And the project that has also been signed by the President this time is the Greater Malay Connectivity Project, which means that this is a infrastructure project wherein the bridge is going to be constructed in Maldives through a financial package consisting of a grant of 100 million and new line of credit of $400 million is being given. This is going to be the largest civilian infrastructure project in Maldives, connecting the capital with the 3 neighboring islands with the construction of a bridge and causeway link spanning 6.7 kilometers. So India is going to take hold of the construction of this Greater Malay Connectivity Project by granting line of credit and loan to Maldives. Then India is also engaged in building a road project in southern Maldives, water and sanitation project across the country, and an airport extension project, among others. So these are the various projects that India is involved into aiding the Maldives government in improving its infrastructure and other facilities. But what are some of the challenges that exist between these two countries? Now the challenges that exist are, first of all, is the domestic political grievances. Now the new president that has been who has been elected is somewhat seen favorable to the Indian position, and that is why he has visited. But the one earlier was very critical of Indian government. So due to the political instability in the country, there have been fluctuations between the relationship between India and Maldives. So democratic institutions have been weakened, and fragile democracy can also be susceptible to radical ideologies if not effectively governed. Therefore, the country is also a hub of terrorism, which makes a problem factor for India, which results into political instability and socio-economic instability, which are the main drivers fueling the rise of Islamist radicalism in the island nation. And it is being radicalized by Saudi Arabia, and it accounted for one of the highest numbers of ISIS terrorists in terms of per capita. So these terrorist dangers also loom large upon Maldives, which India needs to take care of. And then the Chinese factor, as we have talked about, is also significant in Maldives, as the Chinese cooperation is increasing, and therefore India also needs to curb this and equally ramp up its game when we talk about cooperation with Maldives in the strategic sector. And then in the economical front, there is no bilateral FTA, which we saw was the free trade agreement between countries, which enhances the trade. So there is no FTA between the countries, which can be given an impetus and form. And then in certain parts of Maldives, there are anti-India sentiments as well, because of some of the policies of Indian government. Some of the army operations were taken as setting a military base in the Maldives by some residents. So this resulted into a protest against India, which is clubbed under the anti-India sentiments. So this also needs to be checked, and proper communication between the two countries needs to be established for the fostering of a better relationship, because as we saw, Maldives as a country is of much importance for India. So this was the discussion relating to the relations between two countries from the examination point of view. With this, let's move on to our next article. The next article which appears in the newspaper now reads, Wildlife Protection Bill gets Lok Sabha nod. Now this is a fresh bill with respect to the Wildlife Protection Act, that was introduced in the Lok Sabha and has got the affirmation vote from the Lok Sabha. And what amendment bill is this relating to? So the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, this amendment bill will seek to amend this 1972 Act. And this, as we know, is a very important act with respect to our examination, as much of the environmental provisions are contained in the Wildlife Protection Act. So we'll take a look at what are the changes that are suggested in this new bill, which after it gets the Rajya Sabha affirmation as well, the amendment bill will take place into Act, and the 1972 Act will stand updated. So first of all, what was the Wildlife Protection Act 1972? It provided a legal framework for the protection of various species of wild animals and plants, the management of their habitats, and the regulation and control of trade in wild animals, plants and products made from them. So this was the legislation which dealt with the various aspects of how the wild animals of the country will be dealt with. That is why we saw that the notification of national parks, wildlife sanctuaries is being done under this act. So it deals with the animals, the management of these acts, whether certain animals can be hunted. That is why we saw that there are certain schedules in the Wildlife Protection Act which enumerate the various protections granted to them. So for example, if we talk about protection of tiger, it is enlisted in the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act, which grants it the highest level of protection that can be granted to a wild animal in the country. So it deals with all these aspects that this act dealt with, all these aspects. So let's take a look at what are the changes that are being suggested in the amendment bill. So the key features of the bill are that first, the bill tries to implement provisions of the CITES. Now CITES is an international agreement or the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. This is shortly named as the CITES Convention. This CITES Convention is as we saw, is an agreement which deals with how the international trade between the animals and plants, the exotic animals and plants across the world, how should this trade take place? So to restrict the trade for those animals which are highly endangered, it will restrict the trade for them. For those animals which can be traded, it will put in place certain restrictions and conditions for them. So that is what the CITES Convention has. And this particular new bill wants to amend the Wildlife Protection Act in order to implement the provision of this CITES agreement. So under this, the bill seeks to form a management authority. This management authority will be the deciding authority at the national level to assign which animal can be traded with. So it grants export or import permits for trade of the specimens. This is a very crucial intervention that needs to be done, because we see that rampant trade in exotic animals such as the pangolin and other animals keeps on taking place. We keep seeing in the news. So that is why this international trade needs to be regulated, and this management authority, a new body, would be set up to deal with this. And a scientific authority would be there to advise on the scientific basis on aspects related to impact on the survival of the specimens that are being traded. So as we saw about the introduction of African cheetah into India, right? So all of that would be dealt with the management authority as to whether this is whether this should be done, granting the permit. The scientific authority would be taking the research as to will these cheetahs survive in the Kuno National Park, which we saw, which was in MP. So that would be done by the scientific authority. So this is the first feature that is there, implementing the CITES Convention. Then the rationalizing of schedules is going to happen, which means that current system of schedules that are there, that is going to be changed, wherein currently there were 5 to 6 schedules that will be now reduced to only 4. So this would be Schedule 1 for the species that will enjoy the highest level of protection. As I said, the example was tiger. Schedule 2 for the species that will be subject to lesser degree of protection, and Schedule 3 that covers plants. And there was an earlier schedule which dealt with vermin species, those species which are small animals that carry diseases and destroy food. So it has removed the schedule for that, and it has clubbed it under a single schedule, that is a new schedule for specimens listed in the appendices under CITES. So this would give implementation to the CITES Convention. So this is the rationalization of the schedules that will happen under the Act. Then the invasive alien species. We always look in, see news in the newspaper with respect to the alien species or the invasive species which have, what do we mean by invasive alien species? Are those species which were not native to the region but arrived from some other region due to some means, by some humans brought it or some other agent. Now these alien species occupy the non-native territory and occupy that ecosystem and destroy the native species. That is why the invasive alien species are causing much havoc. Recently a newspaper article appeared which said that the invasive snake and frog species have resulted into $16 billion damage globally. How does this do? Because this causes damage to the native crops, native animals who were important for the ecosystem. So monetary damage from this invasive species was touted as $16 billion. So this also needs to be curbed, and therefore the Act or the bill empowers the central government to regulate or prohibit the import, trade and possession or proliferation of invasive alien species. Was this not done earlier in the earlier Act? It was, but now specific provisions with respect to invasive alien species will be there in the new Act. Then would be the control of sanctuaries, which means that greater control would be placed to the Chief Wildlife Warden. This Chief Wildlife Warden, which we should remember, is the nodal authority at the state level to deal with the national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. It is appointed by the state government. And then the concept of conservation reserves is also coming up, which means that those areas around the national park and wildlife sanctuaries, in order to decrease man-animal conflict, certain conservation reserves the government is saying it can also notify, wherein under the Act, state governments may declare areas adjacent to national parks and sanctuaries as conservation reserves for protecting flora and fauna and their habitat. So one can ponder over the difference between then conservation reserves and the eco-sensitive zones that are also there for the adjacent area of national parks. And then is the surrender of captive animals, wherein those animals which were being captured, people can come and surrender under the Act. And finally is the system of penalties, wherein there were penalties for all the crimes that can be committed with respect to the wildlife, and these penalties under the new bill have been increased, wherein earlier if the penalty was 25,000 for an crime committed under the Act, it is now been increased to the amount of 1 lakh. So this is the background with respect to the key features of the bill that is introduced, which forms a very important part for us from the examination. So with this we finish today's discussion, and we'll meet again tomorrow with the important articles from tomorrow's newspaper. Thank you.